That's the Rotax 915IS on my airplane, running for the first time. It took a fuel system hookup, a wiring problem that ate several days, and a full weeks of pre-start checks to get here. Hello everyone, welcome back to my sling build vlog. Let's back up and go through it. First job, connect the fuel and return lines on both wings. The fitting is N6. Wipe it clean with alcohol, thread it by hand, then give it a quarter turn with a wrench. The space under the wing is tight, so it took some trial and error to find a wrench position that will actually turn. When I was in there, I also connected the boost pump wires and the fuel sender signals wire too. Wire connected, I flipped the master switch. I expected the boost pumps to self-test and make some noise, but nothing. I tried the avionics, the EMS backup, both fuel line switches, the pump selectors, and pump override. Nothing turned the pumps on. The boost pump's web portal showed 0 volts, with an error saying it doesn't appear to be shutting off. That made no sense to me. It was never on. Both pumps failed the same way, so the problem was probably something they shared, not two bad pumps. Time to trace wires. First, I ruled out bad pumps. I ran each one of a 12-volt bench supply. Both worked fine. So the problem was something they shared. I checked the VPS, the box that feeds them power. That checked out too. Next, the wiring diagram. This is where it got confusing. The diagram routed pump power and ground through connector RH1, but the RH1 pinout sheet didn't even list these pins. So a fellow builder, Kevin, had the same system. He shared his diagram with me, and his wire went to RH2, not RH1. So I opened RH1 connector and found 4 wires routed there by mistake. I moved them to RH2, pin 19 through 22, and buttoned it back up. First test, the right pump worked. The left pump still read 0 volts. A second separate problem. So I tested the left pump's power and ground lines one at a time. The fault was on the power side. RH2 pin 19 to the VPX read 40 to 50 ohms when it should have been near 0. So that's a bad crimp. I cut the pin out and re-crimped it. Second test, both pumps clicked, ran their self-test, and the fuel pump's error cleared off of the G3X. 2 problems, one bad diagram and one bad crimp. Neither one was obvious just by looking. After that, I went back to the build list for a few weeks. Ailerons, the parachute system, seat covers. I'll cover that in other videos. By mid-August, the focus shifted, getting everything ready for the engine to run. In preparing the engine run, first the pitot static system, the tubes that feed the airspeed and altitude instruments. I put negative pressure on the static line and positive pressure on the pitot line with a syringe, then watched the G3X and G5. Both readings held, so there was no leak. Then it was coolant. I'm using Preston Dex Cool. My first attempt was at mixing it from concentrate went wrong. I mixed up the jugs and dumped distilled water into the concentrate directly, so I lost track of the ratio. Then I went back to the store for a second jug. This time I bought the pre-mixed ones. I filled the expansion tank to the brim, then top off the overflow tank. It was 2,500 millimeters in total. Next, ADHARS calibration. That needs the airplane level first. Per the manual, the second reveal line below the window has to sit level with the ground. I checked it with a laser level. So the nose was a little too high, so I deflated the nose wheel until the level was reached. Then the G3X and G5 ran their calibration, about 30 seconds each. And then fuel tank calibration was more manual. I bought about 20 gallons of UL94 and transferred it 2 gallons at a time from a jug, waiting for the fuel sender reading to settle after each one. Then left tank stopped changing around maybe 12 to 14 gallons, and the right tank stopped changing around 16. Those numbers looked pretty inaccurate. I wouldn't trust the fuel sender as my main reading. I would probably go by the Rotax ECU instead. With fuel in the tank, I run the fuel flow test. First time, the fuel actually moved through the hose. That felt a little scary. My friend Brian, who's an AMP and IA, walked me through it. One tank at a time, one Rotax pump running at a time, and timing how much it came through. The result beat the minimum required by a large margin. The next day, the fuel line finally reached the engine, a whole circuit, tank to inlet. So I turned on the pumps and read the pressure. It was showing 46.1 to 46.2 psi, just a little bit over the 46 psi by the book. I posted to a couple builder groups for a second opinion, and the general consensus was that it's on the right ballpark, close enough to move on. I also test fit both seats. If I'm starting the engine, I need to actually sit in the airplane. So the pilot seat was okay, but the co-pilot seat was stuck and would not slide. So I put it back out and ground about 3 millimeters off of the locking latch. After that, it worked fine. Everything checked out, but I didn't start the engine that day. I picked a smaller job instead and drill holes for the tail fairing. The start will wait for one more day. Then it came to the moment of the truth. On the morning, I pulled the airplane out for one more check. I found a leak at the oil cooler and tightened it. So going in, I had three things on my mind. The cooler leak was handled, and the fuel pressure reading was a little high. I got people's opinion saying that's okay, but I wanted to monitor. And also the wiring harness, since I had to deal with blown fuses a couple months ago, I don't know if we had any damage to the wiring harness. So that's the third thing I'm a little worried about. All three were either handled or out of my hands, so I decided to go ahead. Time for the actual engine start. So my friend Brian stood next to the airplane to spot any issues. Before turning the key, I had a short plan. Confirm the engine starts, watch oil pressure come up right away, watch temperature rise, check the ammeter reading positive, and keep an eye on fuel pressure. And then I turned the key. It started almost right away, no hesitation. It's very different from the traditional like homing on a Cessna. I brought it down to 2000 RPM and checked the gauges. Fuel pressure came up to 47 plus. I think at some point it touched 49, but then eventually settled at 47.1.2. Everything else looked good, so I ran it 3 minutes, then shut it down. First engine start complete. So there you have it, that's the gist of it, the engine start and the work leading up to this point. It's been a couple of years working on this airplane, so when the engine starts, it really felt of a relief. But also there are problems to figure out. So more work to be done. I will see you in the next one.